So degrees and radians, there's a couple of different ways to think about measuring angles. And the one most people are familiar with is degrees, but when you get further into mathematics, there's an additional one that's used called radians. We'll look at that now. To understand this, you're going to need to know some basic algebra and what pi means in terms of the radius of and the circumference of a circle. So obviously you'll need to know what the radius and circumference of a circle are as well. So when we think about measuring angles, the basic idea is, in terms of degrees, we measure how far around a circle you've gone, that far, that far, that far, that far. And it was probably the Babylonians who decided to break that distance of moving around a circle into 360, primarily because it has so many factors. There's so many different ways you can break it out without having to, so you can describe so many different directions basically without having to get into fractions of degrees. So of course, an eighth of a way around a circle is 45 degrees, quarter of the way is 90 degrees, 135 halfway around 180 degrees or a straight line, 225, 270, 315, back to 360 or no degrees. The alternative way of representing this, we use the radius of a circle, and this was developed by a guy called Roger Coates in 1682 as 1716, as people were just starting to get to things like using calculus. The idea here, using radians, it's not nearly as useful for sort of finding your direction with a compass, but it turns out to be much more useful for a lot of mathematical applications. So if we take the radius of a circle and go, imagine we went around the circle, around the circumference of a circle, the degree of 1 radius, then that's going to be 1 radian as a measure. And it doesn't matter how big the circle is, because the radius might be different sizes, but the distance around the circle will change in exact proportion to that. So the angle isn't going to change no matter how big the circle is. That gives us a radian. It's approximately equal to 57.296 degrees, and it turns out just mathematically to be a much more useful way to think about things very often, because, for example, the distance around the circle is going to be exactly the same as the number of radians multiplied by the radius. So if the radius is only 1, then the distance around the outside of a circle will be the number of radians. If you think about measuring in degrees and you're trying to work out how far around the circumference of a circle you are, that's a complicated calculation. If you're using radians, it's a very easy it's a very easy calculation. It's just however far you are going around the outside of the circle is the same as the number of radians multiplied by the size of the radius. So that means 90 degrees is a quarter of the way around a circle. If you take the radius, we know it goes 2 pi around the outside of a circle. So if we want to know how far that is to go a quarter of the way, that's going to be a quarter of 2 pi, which is pi on 2. So 90 degrees is pi on 2 radians, because the radius will go 2 pi times around the outside of the circle. 180 degrees is going to be pi radians. That's degrees and radians. Thank you for watching.